There's a lot of talk breaking on the blogs and elsewhere today over some comments made by Rand Paul, the Tea Party-backed Republican Senate candidate in Kentucky. Now, we're going to let you hear exactly what Rand Paul said. But first, here's a bit of the backstory. Paul gets asked if he would have voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He says, I'm in favor of the way that bill ended discrimination in the public domain. That's all well and good. But then he goes on to say this.
I don't like the idea of telling private business owners. I abhor racism. I think it's a bad business decision to ever exclude anybody from your restaurant. But at the same time, I do believe in private ownership. But I think there should be absolutely no discrimination in anything that gets any public funding. And that's most of what the Civil Rights Act was about, to my mind.
Well, then came the criticism on the blogs and elsewhere. And now Rand Paul has just released a statement saying that he would not support any efforts to repeal the Civil Rights Act, which he says really was never the issue in the first place. Joining me now to talk about it, John Stossel, anchor of Stossel over on the Fox Business Network. Rand Paul is a libertarian. You are a libertarian. He is getting excoriated for suggesting that the Civil Rights Act, what he said was, look, it's got 10 parts, essentially. I favor 9. It's the last part that mandated no discrimination in places of public accommodation that I have a problem with, because you should let businesses decide for themselves, you know, whether they're going to be racist or not racist, because once the government gets involved, it's a slippery slope. Do you agree with that?
Totally. I'm in total agreement with Rand Paul. You can call it public accommodation, and it is, but it's a private business. And if a private business wants to say, we don't want any blonde anchor women or mustached guys, it ought to be their right. Are we going to say to the Black Students Association they have to take white people, or the Gay Softball Association they have to take straight people? We should have freedom of association in America.
Okay, when you put it like that, it sounds fine, right? So who cares if the blonde anchor woman and the mustached anchor man can't go into the lunch room? But as you know, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 came around because it was needed. Blacks weren't allowed to sit at the lunch counter with whites. They couldn't, as they traveled from state to state in this country, they couldn't go in and use a restroom. They couldn't get served meals and so on. And therefore, unfortunately, in this country, a law was necessary to get them equal rights.
Absolutely. But those, Jim Crow, those were government rules. Government was saying we have white and black drinking fountains. That's very different from saying private people can't discriminate.
How do you know? How do you know that these private business owners who own restaurants and so on would have said, you know what, yes, we will take blacks, we'll take gays, we'll take lesbians, if they hadn't been forced to do it?
Because eventually they would have lost business. The free market competition would have cleaned the clocks of the people who didn't serve most customers.
How do you know that, John? I mean, back then it was a different time. Racism and discrimination was rampant. I'm not saying it's been eliminated, but it was rampant. I mean, you know, it was before my time, before I was born. But obviously I've read history, and I know that there's something wrong when a person of color can't get from state to state without stopping at a public restroom or a public lunchroom to have a sandwich.
But the public restroom was run by the government. And maybe at the time that was necessary.
That's not what Rand Paul said. Rand Paul agreed that if it's run by the government, yes, intervention is fine. He took issue with the public accommodations, with private businesses being forced to pony up under the discrimination laws.
And I would go further than he was willing to go, as he just issued the statement, and say it's time now to repeal that part of the law, because private businesses ought to get to discriminate. And I won't ever go to a place that's racist, and I will tell everybody else not to, and I'll speak against them. But it should be their right to be racist.
You know, that is like saying I'm against murder, but I don't want any police out there to actually enforce the law.
I don't think so. You're crossing it, because murder is murder, and
racism and discrimination is awful too.
Discrimination is everywhere. You discriminate when you pick your friends, when you pick your husband, when you pick what you want to eat. We make choices all the time. Private businesses ought to get to make those choices freely.
But, John, it's still okay in this country. It's still legal to be a racist. We're not at the point where you could get arrested for saying racist things. But that is very different from saying somebody who runs a cafe can exclude blacks or gays or people with disabilities or women. And that is actually the point at which this country once was.
Well, and the Boy Scouts cannot say we won't take you if you're gay. The Christian group can't say we'll exclude you if you're Jewish. We ought to have...
Private clubs still have some measure of protection.
Well, so it's just got to be what's the difference between a huge private club and a little cafe?
Generally, it's whether you're a place of public accommodation. You know, it's not like if you have a small group of family that's sitting there saying racist things and not allowing any other, you know, non-racist people into their family. Under the law, that's generally okay. But if you're a restaurant or you're a place where people can come and go, or you're a club, a golf club, then it's not okay according to the Supreme Court.
And I disagree. I think that we should be free. I don't agree with doing it, but I think it's not a government's business.
Well, I want to make this clear. Rand Paul came out. Now he's getting you know, all sorts of criticism.
Flack, as I'm getting flack from you.
Well, come on. We had to have the debate. So listen, he came out today and said, look, I do believe we should work to end racism in America. And then he said the attacks on me from my position here prove one thing for certain, and that's that the liberal establishment is desperate to keep leaders like me out of office. And we are sure to hear more wild, dishonest smears against this campaign. He basically just said, look, this matter was settled when I was 2. I had some issues with the Civil Rights Act, but I am not looking to revisit it. Now, before I let you go, what is this?
Well, it ties in.
Wait,
My show is on free speech tonight, and it's about the freed that we ought to have a right to associate freely. I can't enlist you in a campaign saying, let's have free speech in America, have a barbecue. If we spend $500 in half the states now, we have laws like this written by you lawyers who think everybody else can understand this.
It's my fault?
Yes. Hundreds of pages, so ordinary people can't participate in politics anymore because of rules like this. If you don't fill out all the forms correctly, and when we handed it to professionals, they couldn't do it themselves, it scares people away from participating in public life.
There's a whole lot of red tape. All right, Stossel, always a pleasure, sir. Thanks so much for being here. Folks, you can catch John's show on the FBN at 8 p.m. Tonight, Thursday.